So let's continue our discussion on CPI and inflation. So we already discussed how CPI is going to have some issues, okay, such as the substitution bias or the quality new goods bias. Okay, so to allow for substitution between goods, the Bureau of Labor Statistics uses alternative mathematical methods for calculating CPI. Maybe they're going to update the basket of goods and services behind the CPI more frequently. We're able to do that now nowadays with the updates in technology. We're able to get more real-time data about what's being sold and the prices that they're being sold at. So that could include new and improved goods more rapidly. So instead of it taking 10 years to add an air conditioner, it would take a lot less time, maybe a year or two, to add something. The substitution bias and quality new goods bias have been somewhat reduced. Are they still a problem? Yes. However, the issues that they cause much more reduced now. So therefore, the rise in CPI most likely overstates the true rise in inflation by about only 0.5% per year. So is it overstating? Yeah. Is it that much of a concern? No. So it's important to know that it is still not 100% accurate, but it is also not terribly inaccurate as well. Because we do have other ways that we measure inflation, such as the core inflation index. One of these would be the CPI excluding economic variables such as energy and food prices. So energy prices change very, very frequently, so they're very volatile. Volatile meaning they change a lot. So volatile, sorry, I can't spell volatile. Volatile. That's not how you spell it either. I can't spell. But volatile meaning that it changes frequently. Okay? An economist can have a better sense of the underlying trends in prices that affect the cost of living. So basically, because the energy prices change a lot, it's going to show inflation higher than it usually is. So basically, the core inflation index kind of excludes some things to get to the core of what you do buy. Is energy a typical thing that you buy? Yeah. But because it changes so often, sometimes economists like to use the core inflation index as basically like what's happening at the core, so we don't get like misskewed numbers here. It is a preferred gauge from which to make important government policy changes as well. Some other price indices that we use are going to be the producer price index. So remember how with GDP we do not calculate the intermediate goods? Here we do. So the producer price index is going to be measuring the inflation based on the prices paid by supplies, or paid for supplies and inputs by producers. So the goods that you are buying, like the steel for a car, that price there, we want to know the price of the steel here because that's going to be included in the producer price index. Different industries and commodities and stages of processing, we really want to look at the stage throughout making something. What are the producers paying for this stuff and how is that changing? Producer price index is measuring the change in the producer's price on buying things. Another one's going to be the international price index. This is measuring the prices on the exports and the imports. Okay, we're looking at basically if you're trading between the United States and Italy, you want to look at how are the prices changing there. Okay, that would be the international price index. Employment cost index is also an important one. We want to be measuring the inflation based on the wages paid in the labor market. So basically what's happening here is that we can track inflation, all right, and we can also track wages. Typically what's happening is that whenever there's inflation, employers or employees are really like, hey, prices are higher, I need more money to buy things. So employers will say, okay, fine, let's give you an increase in the wage. And so the employment cost index is going to be measuring the inflation based on the wages paid in the labor market. So because the wages change, How is that affecting the inflation? Employment cost index. Another one's going to be the GDP deflator. Remember, that one is taking the nominal GDP and dividing it by the real GDP. So GDP deflator, a measurement of inflation based on the prices of all GDP components, C, I, G, and X. So that one, the difference between like a CPI and GDP deflator, I mean, when you're talking about GDP, you're talking about businesses, government, foreign countries, and consumers. So really, really broad. Like if you were looking at GDP deflator, you would be considering the price of a rocket. But in CPI, you wouldn't. So GDP deflator is going to be much more broad because you're looking at everything in the country. And then CPI is going to be much more specific about what is the consumer buying. GDP deflator, more broad. CPI, a little bit more specific about what we're doing. So we do have a thing called deflation. Deflation is where we're having negative inflation, or we're having a general decline in the prices. Okay, so basically over time, we're seeing prices decreasing. That's going to be deflation. That's when most prices in the economy are falling. Hyperinflation is when there is an outburst of high inflation. Most of the time this occurs because economies are shifting from a controlled economy to a market economy. Basically, the prices should have been more valued. And as soon as we switch to a market economy, dramatically the value of what you're paying for is increasing. So of course, we will have more inflation during these times. So hyperinflation is pretty straightforward. High inflation, hyperinflation. And then we have another word called stagflation. I like to think of stagflation as just a bad time. Bad time because we're going to have high unemployment and high inflation. Just a bad time. Nobody's working and we're having high inflation. So just bad all the way around. Stagflation. Now there is some confusion over inflation. Basically what's happening here is like because you're getting paid 10% more in your wages, are you actually getting the 10% increase in your wage? So inflation is going to be sending some mixed signals. So if other economic variables, prices, wage, and interest rates, do not move in sync with inflation, so inflation up, wages up, like if they go at the same time, then you will be fine, basically. If they adjust for inflation over a time lag, then inflation could cause a couple problems. So basically, if inflation goes up and then it goes up again and then your wages change, then we're having a problem because your inflation is increasing more than your wages. And three problems are going to happen here. Number one, lenders could be hurt by inflation. This is called a redistribution of purchasing power. So what's happening here is that if you were to borrow money from somebody, so we have a lender who's giving money to the borrower, and the borrower is paying back the interest. So here's how it goes. When you are determining how much to charge for interest, the lender is going to say, okay, I want to make 7% interest because I want to make 3% profit. Like I want to make 3% on my money. And I want to make sure I cover the inflation. Because here's the deal. If inflation is increasing by 4%, but you're only making 3% on money, right? Then that means you are decreasing your purchasing power. Okay? So what's happening here is if inflation is more than your real okay, whatever really happened, okay, then you are losing purchasing power. Okay, like if you wanted to increase wages by 5%, but inflation is 10%, you're not getting the 5% in really what's happening. You are actually losing your purchasing power. So, in terms of lending money, you want to cover the inflation. So, what you do is you're like, okay, I want to make 3%, okay, and then I want to make a little bit of extra just because of inflation. So, you are guessing 4% inflation, okay? So, you're like, hey, I'll charge you 7% interest. What you're doing here is you're doing the nominal interest rate based off of the real interest, like what you actually want to make, plus the expected inflation. All right, so that's what you want to do. So you agree to do this. Okay, now you agree to do this January 1st. And then the year goes by, you get paid your 7% interest. Okay. Now on December 31st, the Bureau of Labor Statistics say inflation was actually 7%. So you're looking at this and you're like, oh no, inflation was 7%. I was guessing it was 4%. So let's see what happened here. You charge them 7% interest. Okay. And then the inflation was 7%. So how much did you really make? Okay, if we subtracted the 7% over, your real interest was 0%. So because of inflation, you as a lender are hurting. You were supposed to make 3% because of this equation here. You're like, okay, I want to make 3%. I'm guessing 4% inflation, so I'm going to charge you 7. Okay, and then after the year happened, inflation was actually 7%, and so you really earned no money. Okay, so this equation right here is really, really important. Nominal equals real plus inflation. So here's the deal. If the lender is hurting in this situation, the borrower would be benefiting. Because here's the deal. If inflation is higher, you should be paying a higher nominal interest rate, like you should be. But because you're not, you are benefiting, right? So basically what happens here is like you should be paying 10% because of the inflation, but you're actually only paying 7. So borrowers benefit. So there are lenders are hurt by inflation and borrowers could benefit. Same thing happens with your wages. Wages are lagging behind inflation. So what happens here is your boss gives raise of 5% in wages, okay? But here's the deal. That's your nominal increase, is that 5%. So let's see what actually happened here. So if we did 5% nominal, and we don't know the real, but let's say the inflation was 7%. What happened to your real wage? If we subtracted this over, your real wage would be -2%. So here's the deal. You think you're getting paid more money, okay, 5%. But what actually happened was you're actually losing 2% because of inflation. And so what needs to happen here is your boss needs to pay you at least 7% so that you could be the same. Okay? But if your wages are lagging behind inflation, such as 5%, 7%, they're lagging, your real wage is decreasing. Fixed income households, same thing. So imagine you had no increase in wage. So instead of 5%, it was 0% because your fixed income, fixed meaning it doesn't change. So if you're on a fixed income, wage isn't changing, but inflation is, you're having negative real wage. Much more worse than that. Okay? Also, blurred price signals. When the level and changes of prices become uncertain, businesses and individuals find it harder to react to economic signals. So basically, it's hard to determine, what our price is going to do next. Like, should I buy now? Should I buy later? So it's kind of like a different situation here because I don't know where prices are heading. So I don't know if that's a cheaper price or not. I don't know if I should buy it now or later. Because of inflation, it's like, well, I don't know the real value of it. So it's going to be sending some blurred price signals. This also makes it difficult in planning for the long term, right? Because if you're planning for retirement, you're looking in the future. What is the future value of my money? And if inflation's happening, the future value of your money is decreasing. And so that makes it really, really hard to plan for the retirement. More time spent on businesses finding new ways of profiting versus inflation. So basically what happens is when there's inflation, businesses have two options. They could raise price. If they raise price, they lose customers. Or they could spend time lowering cost. And guess what? They're spending time lowering costs. And that's going to waste time for them. So basically that's less time spent on productivity, innovation, or the quality of service. And all of that because of inflation. Just because it's more expensive, you have to make a decision about what to do. You're kind of wasting time instead of actually doing business. So that's some confusion or some issues with inflation. The main thing is I really want you to understand are right here. Lenders are hurt by inflation. Your real wage could be decreasing. And you do have some blurred price signals. Now, in terms of just like increasing your wage, there could be a thing called indexed. So this is where a price, wage, or an interest rate is automatically adjusted for inflation. Some examples are the cost of living adjustment. So basically what's happening here is it's a contract with somebody that says, hey, we saw inflation's 4%. I need my wages to increase by 4%. So that is a cost of living adjustment. Adjustable rate mortgages, same idea. So basically when you're trying to buy a house, instead of saying, I'm going to pay 7% forever, I wanted to adjust with the market rates. So basically when inflation changes, that changes the interest rate. And if the interest rate changes, my mortgage rate will change. So it adjusts. It could be lower than 7%. It could be higher than 7%. It is adjusting with inflation. So it's a type of loan where a borrower uses to purchase a home in which the interest rate varies with the market interest rates. It changes with inflation. Okay? So that's called indexed, is where your price, wage, or interest rate is indexed to inflation. So it's changing with inflation. So it's moving like this in the same way, where if inflation goes up, so do your wages. Okay? That's a good thing. It could be hard to really calculate those things in real time, but they are a good thing. And so indexing in government programs. So same idea in terms of like those fixed income households, like retired people. Sometimes their Social Security benefits are going to be indexed to inflation just to make sure that they're good to go. The U.S. government does offer indexed bonds. Basically, if you wanted to buy a bond with the government, that is indexed, meaning it's going to change with inflation. So that does happen at the government level as well. So that is our discussion on inflation and how it changes. In the next video, we will talk more about macroeconomics. Okay, I'll see you there.